Aloha and welcome back to the Tiki Talk Show. I'm Riley.
And I'm Ellie.
And today we have a very special episode for you. We have Otto and Baby Doe von Stroheim.
This is our first two-part series, and we were so grateful to host them not once, but twice. In this episode, we get into all of the early days, from the late 80s all the way up to the year 2001, so pre-Tiki Oasis. If that's what you were hoping for and hankering for, you'll have to stick around for our next part on the next episode. But we had so much fun talking about the early days, everything they got into from getting into Tiki to meeting and everything that they did together. It's a lot to get into, as you can tell. And we had so much fun.
Absolutely. There's certain names that are so associated with the Tiki Revival, you have to say them every single time you talk about it. Whether that is Sven Kirsten or Jeff Barry, you have to talk about Otto and Baby Doe. Because like Ellie said, it's not just Tiki Oasis. Otto started throwing his famous backyard luau's in the late 80s. He started Tiki News in the mid-90s. He did Exoticon later that year. We get into how Otto and Baby Doe met and all the things they did together leading up to that very first Tiki Oasis before we cut over for episode 2. So we really hope that you enjoy this first part of this episode. There's so much that we covered and we're really appreciative of their time.
So enjoy part 1 with Otto and Baby Doe.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to the Tiki Talk Show. I'm Riley.
And I'm Ellie.
And today we're sitting down with Otto and Baby Doe. How are you both doing?
Great.
Aloha.
Can you guys just briefly introduce yourselves for anybody who is unfamiliar, which I don't believe is any of our listeners, but can you still introduce yourself and then tell us how you both got into Tiki or the world of vintage in mid-century modern?
Sure. I'm Otto von Stroheim, also known as DJ Otto. I'm the founder of the Tiki News zine and the co-owner of Tiki Oasis.
Aloha, I'm Baby Doe, and I am the co-founder also of Tiki Oasis with Otto, and we have been into this together since 1996.
Could you just briefly tell us how did you get into Tiki? Was it something that you remember from your childhood? Was it something that you found later on in life? Was it the art that drew you or anything like that?
Yeah.
Sure.
So I was born and raised in Southern California around Torrance and the San Fernando Valley. Then in my adult life, I lived in Venice and worked in Santa Monica. And the Tiki lifestyle and Tiki bars and roadside vernacular and amusement parks were just always around me, and they're part of my life blood. And I thought that the whole world was like that. I thought every state had 10 amusement parks and a dozen tiki restaurants. And, I realized that we had the beach. I went to the beach a lot as a kid and as an adult. So when I lived in Venice and, every house has tropical landscaping, birds of paradise flowers and banana trees, and there's palm trees all over LA. And there would be tiki bars, in the 80s and 90s, there would be old tiki bars still left. I mean, in the heyday, there might have been 30 or 40 of them around the greater Los Angeles area. And then, when I really started looking for them in the late 80s and early 90s, there'd only be 5 or 6 left or something. But, in San Francisco, there was another 5 or 6. And, if you went to Arizona, there'd be 2 or 3. If you went to the Pacific Northwest, Portland or Seattle, there'd be a couple, Vancouver, there would be old tiki bars everywhere, a few of them. And so in the 80s and 90s, like we could just go into these places and just experience them. But the actual like how I got back into tiki as an adult was that me and my roommate Ivan got a house in Venice, and we had a little backyard, and we said, let's throw a summer party. And he was an architecture student, and he said, let's make it a tiki party. And I said, what's tiki? And he's like, well, it's like Hawaiiana, but you don't have the roasted pig, and it's not Hawaiian, it's American. It's like googie architecture, like coffee shops and tiki bars. And I was like, oh yeah, I know what that is, like the tiki room at Disneyland. And so that's how I got my start in tiki.
Venice Beach, California.
Venice Beach, and I, collecting tiki mugs and throwing these backyard parties.
Yeah. I think, I sort of have a somewhat similar story because I also grew up in Southern California. So I grew up going to Disneyland, grew up seeing, you're just kind of living in sort of a tiki lifestyle without realizing it. There's lots of architecture. There's a vibe of living in, growing up in Southern California. As a kid, we went to places like Kelbo's, and, I have like memories of sharing a big bowl of some kind of tropical drink with my sisters. And, that seemed sort of like naughty and exotic, and different. And as a teen, I really got into thrift shopping, and that's sort of how I got into retro vintage stuff. That's when I started finding things that piqued my interest, from clothing to records to tiki mugs, all of those things were sort of very readily available in thrift shops back in the 80s. And but speaking about tiki in particular, I did not set out to be a tiki mug collector at all, or a tiki collector. My sister actually was. So my sister and her husband loved tiki stuff. And so throughout like the 80s and early 90s, anytime I would go thrift shopping and I'd find a tiki mug, I'd give it to them. And then I think maybe around 1992, they said, we have a whole shelf. We have about 50 tiki mugs. We don't want any more. That's it. Like, we don't need any more of these, but I would still find them. And so I started collecting them for myself. And so when in 1994, I was going to San Francisco State University, and you got a free website. I didn't even know what a website was, but I was like, okay, something free, something fun. And my boyfriend at the time said, hey, like explained what a website was to me, and said, you should like not use your real name. And, do you have a nickname? And I said, oh, my childhood nickname was always Baby Doe. That's sort of like what my family has always called me. I'll call my website Baby Doe. And I right away just said, I'm going to make my website all about my obsession with other people's obsessions. So one of that was tiki mugs. Like I knew lots of people that were already collecting tiki mugs, not to the extent they are today at all. But just people that collected things. Like I just thought that was really cool, and just I was sort of obsessed with that. And so I would call it sort of like an online blog now, but at the time it was really like a website that when you were to search in like 1994 or 1995, like tiki on the internet, it would be like me and a dog named Tiki and Tiki Barber, and that's it.
Tiki Barber, the football player.
And there was nothing else. Like that was like I was it to be searched.
It's
for
true.
Tiki.
Yeah, because I was friends with guys that were innovative in the internet, like say Bernard Yin, who worked for AOL, and Wyndham Chow, who worked for I don't know. He later worked for Sony. They were kind of progressive in the internet, and they told me, oh, you should have email. Oh, you should have website. Oh, you should do this and do that. And we searched Tiki all the time, and then eventually Wyndham found Baby Doe. and then we're like, wow, here's a person that's actually talking about Tiki stuff and not just Tiki the dog. There was multiple Tiki the dogs, I think. There's one that was really, but I think there was other ones.
But it's funny because I was a big zine stir too. I loved garage music. I loved collections. I loved retro stuff, and I also loved fanzines. And so my favorite thing to do living in San Francisco as a pastime was to go to the local like record store and kind of dig through the pile of fanzines. And one day I came across Tiki News, and I was like, what? Mind blown. Tiki, and it's a zine. I can't believe this. So of course I subscribed right away, and I joined Otto's email list, and I didn't know who Otto was. He lived in Southern California, but I was so happy that there was somebody doing this. And I would say Tiki News, all of that happened very quickly. Like that joint started in January of 1995. And then you did Exoticon later that year in Los Angeles. And when Exoticon was happening, I was like, how can I get to, I was living in San Francisco, this is happening in Los Angeles. How can I get there? And I could not figure out how to get myself down to Exoticon, but it was a very, everything was happening very quickly. And I think like when we tell people the stories of like the 90s, like this was like a time when, like it was just like a new discovery. Like you were connecting with people that you never thought you would get to connect with and learn about so many different topics in a very rapid way. And so that's sort of like my story of how I got into tiki. I'll stop there.
We have lots of stories.
Stories.
I love it. Yes.
We're excited to hear all of them.
Yeah. So Otto, you talked about a little bit about those backyard luau's, those backyard parties, and we've heard from many of our guests that this was one of the best contributions to those early tiki days because it brought people together. Can you tell us a little bit about what those parties were like and how they got kind of put together?
Yeah, I put them all together. We had a house with like 3 roommates, so Ivan was one of them, and we had 2 others, and we would all agree to dress up. So my roommate, it was almost like a little Halloween thing for them. They would go like, "I don't have a Hawaiian shirt," and I would go, "Okay, I was at the thrift shop this week, and I have like 3 extras. Okay, so do any of these fit you? You know?" And then we'd hang the extra ones up in the kitchen. Like if anybody showed up in all black, we'd go, "Hey, you want a Hawaiian shirt?" You know, so we'd try to encourage people to do that, and then we would create bamboo things and paintings on canvas and hang them around, you know, and we would always have bands. So at the first one, my friend's band Victor Banana played on the front porch as people were entering, and you know, we had an invite that had a schedule, and I did the graphics for it, and we mailed it out. You know, it was all, you know, DIY, like hands-on, like mail order and zine style kind of stuff, and it had all the roommates' names on it, and I would give them each a pile of flyers to give to all of their friends. And then that first one, we also had a like a Caribbean or African drumming band play in the backyard, and they accompanied our limbo. And we had the limbo for a few years until somebody like threw their back out, and then I was thinking like, whoa, you know, we're all getting close to being 30 years old. Like maybe we shouldn't do limbo anymore, you know? So we stopped the limbo. And so we just had this once a year, you know, so it was a big deal for my friends and my roommates and their friends, and mostly it was my coworkers. And then I was friends with bands, like say the Insect Surfers. I would go see them all the time. And then I just said like, "Hey man, can you play my backyard? It's just my thing, you know, I can only pay you out of my pocket. I'll give you like $50 or $100, you know." So the bands all said yes every time. Like nobody said like, "Nah, I normally get $500." They all said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it." And then later on, like more bands like were asking me like, "Hey, can I play your backyard?" And I was like, no, because I already got the Neptunas to play my backyard party, and you know, there's no room for you on the bill." So we would only have like, you know, 1 or 2 bands every year. But you know, I'm happy to say that we had like a pretty good reputation. Like we had a band, Possum Dixon, like Rob Zabrecki's now a famous magician, and back then when they played my backyard, they were kind of big. Like they had just got signed to Interscope, you know, so they were kind of this big deal. Like people heard that Possum Dixon played in my backyard, and people around LA and said, "Whoa, what the heck is that? You know, I want to go to it." So it got the party got a little bit out of control.
Yeah, the 5, 6, 7, 8s from Japan.
Yeah, one year the Phantom Surfers and the 5, 6, 7, 8s were on tour in Southern California. So not all the members, but some members of each of those bands came and played as like, you know, the Phantom 5, 6, 7, 8s or something. You know, so that was pretty cool. Like half of the Phantom Surfers and half of the 5, 6, 7, 8s came and played in the backyard, you know.
And you hosted the parties for about 10 years or 9 years.
Yeah, so I guess you know, the last one was in
97,
96, so it started in 87, I guess then it would be, you know, 87 to 96.
And I only got to go to the last one, but I would say that I think what's sort of mind blowing for people today is that Otto would find all these tiki mugs, you know, at thrift shops. So he had like all the tiki mugs out, and people would just like grab a tiki mug, fill it up with the punch. And
I think I might have put a little tag on the good ones that say don't use these on the shelf.
It was sort of like everybody was just sort of like learning about this. There was no value to these tiki mugs because you could buy them for like, you know, 49 cents at the thrift store. So people could kind of look at their favorites and pick which ones they wanted.
Yeah, well,
and
I have a comment on that. Like that's how I got my mug collection, because I started thrifting to find Hawaiian stuff and find decor, like, you know, fake plants or wooden bowls or monkey pod bowls and bamboo things, you know, to put in the backyard for the parties. And I found a tiki mug, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." It was Easter Island tiki mug from the Tikis. And then the next tiki mug I found maybe a couple of coconut, like Trader Vic coconuts or stuff like that. Then I found Mark Thomas Outrigger Moai, the green one, which now Kabali, that's Finney's favorite mug from Kabali, and he has a big statue in the middle of his bar. But so that became my favorite mug, and it was like maybe the second mug that I ever found thrifting. And so then I realized like, oh man, I want more of these tiki mugs, and I put them on my shelf. So then people that came the next year was like, hey man, I found this tiki mug at the thrift shop a few months ago. Here you go, you can have it. Like people came and they didn't want their tiki mugs that they found, and they gave them to
Donate
me.
it. Yeah.
So after a couple of years, my whole shelf was full. I started with 10, then all of a sudden I had 20, then I had 40. You know, and that was a huge collection. Like when I had 40 mugs, some guy who owned a vintage store said to me, "Wow, you should write a book about this. Like you have so many mugs and you know all about these mugs. You should really write a book." And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I have like 50 mugs. Like,
You might have a
isn't that
lot.
crazy?
Well, I think what always is kind of like so cool about Otto is he loved bringing people together. So that was a big part about the backyard party is like, oh, I'm going to bring these people together. I'm going to, we're going to have a celebration. We're going to have a party. And, you were involved in a few other communities before Tiki stuff where it just like, that was sort of his thing is like bringing people together.
And everybody was invited to my party.
Yeah.
It wasn't just VIPs. I didn't limit it except for one year I had to because the previous year it had gone out of bounds and there was too many people in my backyard.
Yeah.
Like literally they couldn't fit in the backyard. Like they were in the front yard because they couldn't get into the backyard. The backyard held, I don't know, 300 people maybe standing, and there was like 400 people. Like it was a disaster. Like the cops came and stuff. But like people would like just drop by, like I don't know, Stella, who was a DJ on KXOU, would bring people like Dookie Flyswatter from Haunted Garage, this band that was kind of big at the time, and like I didn't invite them, like they just like would come with a friend, and my buddy Senor More and Cyrano from KXOU, like they were kind of famous at the time, like people were like, oh, I listened to your radio show, all 2,000 people or whatever in LA that listened to their radio show, so like anybody could come. My coworkers like had no idea, like they would come and they didn't know who Stella was or anybody, like they didn't care. So it was kind of funny. Yeah, it was just all different kinds of people.
Yeah. Well, I think, and it definitely seems in those early days, you look at it, it's where you don't have like Tiki VIPs or anything like that, or people that know more. It was just seemed that everybody, this is the thing I like, this is the thing I found. When did you start research, or how was researching back then when you started going, oh, the Tiki's was an amusement park, or this bar was here? How was that process? And when did the pieces kind of start coming together to figure out where these Tiki mugs were coming from?
Yeah, I really only did that like to find out the history of the Tiki mugs so that I could find out like, oh, I said like, oh, the Tiki's has this moai. Maybe that restaurant has other Tiki mugs. I should go to that restaurant and see if I can buy the mugs, because when you went to Kelbo's, you could buy the mugs. Like even in the 80s, you could buy these mugs that were like originally made like in the 60s or 70s or something. They're still sitting there in the counter for like 10 or 15 bucks.
Please, someone buy these dusty.
Yeah, and I thought, I said, I'm not going to buy that thing for 10 bucks. I'm going to find it in a thrift shop for 99 cents. And then I never found one in a thrift shop. But anyways, like the Tiki's, I looked in the yellow pages. I couldn't find it. There was no internet. So I called up the city where it was, and I asked 411 information. Yeah, I need, this number for this, the Tiki's in Monterey Park. And they're like, yeah, we don't have a number. And I'm like, okay, well, the Tiki's somewhere. No, we don't have the number, So they were, little did I know they had been out of business for like 40 years, And the same thing, like Mark Thomas Outrigger, I called them up and they still existed, So I went up there, and then it was bleak. It was all painted white and stuff. And I was like, oh God, they did have one of the mugs in a little case, and they had like a Tiki in a case. And so I was disillusioned because I thought that every Tiki bar should look like Kelbo's. Kelbo's was outrageous. The exterior of it had a big, like a lighthouse, like a mini lighthouse that was like 3 stories tall, and a cuckoo's nest up there that the guy lived in, the owner, the son's owner lived in. And then the exterior was all decorated, and there was a mural painted on the side wall that faced the street on the back near the parking lot. And then you go inside, and the doors had laminated like this resin art in the doors. So during the day when the sunlight shone through, you could see it, and then at night you could see glowing lights coming out of it from the opposite direction. And then you get inside, and it's all dark, and there's just stuff everywhere, like all over the ceiling, in the walls of the booths, like there's stuff like everywhere, and like a diver's suit where the hostess station is supposed to be, like just stuff everywhere, and lamps everywhere, and different rooms. And and then no people.
No people, nobody's buying anything. I think what's sort of funny in like the 80s, like, we would find these things, like you would find matchbooks or menus or postcards. And in my mind, like all of these things still existed. I
Yeah.
was just like, of
Yeah.
course they still exist. You find like an old menu, and people, you could have like these fun drinks and everything. And I think that, as I went out into the world and I started to realize, like, oh, wait, maybe these places aren't there anymore, and I would go to, say, a bar, and I would look at my vintage, like, cookbook, like, okay, I'm going to go to the bar and order a pink squirrel.
Yeah.
And they'd be like,
Tropical itch.
what are what are you talking
Shark's
about?
fin.
Like, we serve beer, So I would imagine like I could go to these old school style places and I could have that experience that maybe my parents had or grandparents had. And it quickly became obvious that those experiences were fading and fading quite quickly. These places were really, by the 80s and late 80s, early 90s, were closing very rapidly, and that's where I think I would say a lot of people that are into like vintage or retro stuff, it's because like you realized, like, wait a second, is this like going away? Is this fading away? And that's why you started to find on the internet these communities of people that you can connect with, right? Like, people, there was a whole list serve about Exotica music that both Otto and I were on, and it's like, who are the people, what is Exotica music, and people sharing their records and sharing photos and sharing who these people are, or like vintage fashion or pinup style, hair or makeup and things like that. You couldn't readily find it, but you could find people that were willing to share what they knew. And so that starts to kind of when you start putting people together, you start to put these communities together and these little like clubs of people together. And I would love for Otto to share the story of just, why he created Tiki News and how you met like Sven and Bosco and Jeff and so on. Because I think that's like it's a really great example of like how it
Yeah.
was happening kind of rapidly and through connections.
Well, there was the swing scene and the lounge scene that were taking off at the same time. And so, um, if you look back on history, like the Tiki News was right there in the middle of it, like right at the beginning. Tiki News, I had planned to launch it, and I had told my friends and everything, okay, I'm going to launch it, in January of 1995. So I had met Sven and Beach Bum Berry and Bosco in '94 and maybe even '93, I'm not sure. And I had met other people like Bernardin, around that time. And one way that I met people that Bernardian likes to tell this story all the time is I made a little flyer about, it was a quarter size page flyer so I could get 4 of them up on an 8.5 by 11. So I didn't use a lot of paper. And it was, I forget what it said exactly, but it basically just said, if you're into tiki stuff and Exotica music, email me. And that's all it was. And I had like a picture of Martin Denny album or something. And I would go to all the record stores and I would seed them into the Martin Denny and Arthur Lyman records. So I'd travel around like, Pasadena, South Bay, the Valley, LA, and go to all the record stores. And when I found a Martin Denny record or an Arthur Lyman record, I would put that in it. And I would do that at thrift shops too. Like if I found you go to a thrift shop and you find Taboo, but it's like kind of trashed, and I already had a good copy. So I would leave that one there, but I would throw a flyer in it. And so that's how I got, that's how I got the word out. It didn't work that good. I put out, I don't know, a couple hundred flyers and met like 5 people or something. But it was important. The people that I met were important. I think I might have met Dave Arnson from the Insect Surfers that way too. I'm not sure. So I had started this, little movement, like trying to gather people that were into this stuff too. And so I was researching a mug. Like I said, I found those mugs and I would try to call the places, and see if they're still in existence. And then from that, I thought, oh, I want to go see these tiki bars, these places, and so I might go out to a place like Bahuka that was still there, for a long time. And then ironically, I moved up to the Bay Area in '96 and I look back and I think, God, I only went to Bahukas like, I don't know, 5 or 10 times. But I knew about it all along. It's just that it was so far away. It was just such a hassle. Like it was, almost an hour drive. It was just too far. And like now I would travel to Fort Lauderdale now to go to a tiki bar, or like, Arizona, or like, Vancouver now. Like if there's a tiki bar there, okay, I'll fly out there. But back then it was like, oh man, Kelbo's is only like 15
That's
minutes up the road, or like I could drive out to the San Fernando Valley in about 25 minutes and go to the Tonga Hut. I don't need to drive an hour out to Whittier or whatever.
Right.
So it's kind of funny. Now, what
so
was the
you
question that we were talking about?
but how you met Sven is fun because that was through your roommate.
Well, yeah. So my roommate Ivan had come home from school, SciArc, Southern California Institute of Architecture, and said, "Oh, we have this speaker series during the summer." And he's like, "Hey, how come you weren't at the speaker series meeting tonight? Some guy spoke about tiki." And I said, "Oh man, why didn't you tell me?" He goes, "Oh, well, I didn't know that was going to be the program tonight. But you could probably just call up the school." So I call up the school. "Hey, you had this speaker last night. His name is Sven Kirsten." They're like, "No, we didn't have a speaker." And I'm like, "Yeah, your summer speaker series." They're like, "Oh yeah, the guy's name is Pete Maruzzi." I'm like, "No, it was Sven Kirsten." And they're like, "Well, the only person we know is Pete Maruzzi." And I'm like, "Okay, give me his phone number." I call up Pete Maruzzi and I'm like, "Hey, you know this guy Sven Kirsten?" And he's thinking like, "Who is this weirdo calling me? Like, this is crazy. Like, I'm not giving this guy any information. Like, he's going to come over my house and rob me or something." Right? Like, people just, I'm just calling him. I'm going, "Yeah, Sven gave this slideshow." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it was the Modernism Committee." And Pete was like the head of the LA Conservancy, which is an architectural preservation foundation in LA. And he was the head of the Modernism Committee of the LA Conservancy. And he said, "Yeah, well, come to our meeting next Thursday night or whatever at, 7 o'clock or whatever." So I show up at this meeting and I walk in, and there's like five people in this room. In this, like, like office building or whatever on the second floor or whatever. And they go, "Hi, who are you?" And I go, "Oh, I heard that Sven Kirsten was going to be here. Like, I heard this is the Modernism Committee." And they look at me really weird. They're like, "No, Sven's not here." And I said, "Oh, well, could I join or something?" And they're like, "Well," Chris Nichols walks up to me. Do you know Chris Nichols? He's the editor of LA Magazine, and like he put out a new book called Bolorama. He's been into modernism since he was like 15 years old or something, man. For like 40 years, he's been into modernism. And so he comes up to me and he shows me two photos. He goes, "Okay, well,
Whoa.
oh, look at that. He goes, "So what kind of building do you like?" And it was like like the LAX, building that's at LAX,
Then
or it was like a Pasadena, arts and crafts style house, like the one
it's like a pass.
Yeah. So he held up these two photos and said, "What type of architecture do you like?" And I'm like, "Oh, that one, the LAX theme building. Yeah, that's cool. And he's like, "Okay, you're in the right place. Yeah, you're welcome to hang out, and listen to our meeting." And I'm like, "Well, is Pete Maruzzi here?" And they're like, "No, he doesn't come to all the meetings." And I'm like, "Okay, well, how do I meet Sven?" And they're like, "I don't know. Pete has his number." Like it was this whole song and dance to try to like meet these people and figure out what was going on. And I told them like, "Hey, I'm into tiki stuff." They're like, "Oh yeah, so are we." But I don't know. It's just like it's so funny in the beginning. Like if you tell somebody now you're into tiki stuff, you immediately have a conversation. You know what to talk about. They collect mugs maybe, and maybe they have a home tiki bar, or they have a local tiki bar that they frequent that's in their town. And they meet up with their friends.
Hotels,
Like
yeah.
say, I'm in Alameda, so I have Forbidden Island, and the Forbidden Island Ohana group, meets there every. Ooh, I think it's Wednesdays. Is it Wednesdays? I don't go all the time, but there's a particular night of the week where they go, and they get a drink special or they celebrate somebody's birthday or whatever. And that's in every town, not every town, in a lot of towns. I mean, it's in Indianapolis, it's in Atlanta, it's in Florida, it's in Seattle, right? I mean, that kind of stuff goes on now. But back then, like if you told somebody you're into tiki stuff, they'd ask you some question. They go, "Okay, well, like, what
What
do you
does that
like?"
mean? Yeah.
Like, yeah, what does that mean? So it was just kind
Yeah.
of weird. So that's how I met Sven, and then I invited him to my backyard parties, and I'm not even sure if he came the first time, but then he invited me to. At the same time, he was having what he called salons, so it was for artists, and he wanted to gather artists together to share with them what he had learned over the past month or two. So, like, say he would have like. The history of the Don the Beachcomber map. So the Don Beachcomber map has Covarrubias style painting of the Pacific, and then it has icons. And the icons are kind of weird because they're a little bit different than the style of the map. So there's like a hula girl, but then there's these tikis on it. And so he broke that down and said, oh, well, see, this tiki here comes from this place here, and then this other restaurant used it on their menu, and then this other restaurant used it on their menu, and this record album took this thing and put it on their record album. And so all these people took all this stuff from Don the Beachcomber and dispersed it, and used it for themselves. And this is the history of the Don the Beachcomber map. So he would have salons like that, like one salon would be like, San Diego's Tiki Palaces, and he would visit these places and have a slideshow of it. So I went to one of his salons, and the people there were like Dale Sizer, who is a famous illustrator and at the time was working in Hollywood, like doing sketchboards. Mark Ryden, who is now a very successful and very famous artist. Bosco was there. He had driven up from San Diego just to go to a slideshow in somebody's living room. Okay, because Bosco didn't know any other tiki people around in his area except for his brother Steve, who were collecting at that level, who were collecting matchbooks and menus and mugs and
making and starting to
trying to find out about it. Let's see, who else was there? Well, Chris Nichols, yeah, and Jeff Berry was there making cocktails. And then when people, especially myself, tasted these cocktails, we said, "Whoa, what is this?" And he's like, "Well, see, it's the recipe that I got from, the blah blah hotel, and they made these back in the 60s, and so I've recreated it the same way they would have made them." And it blew my mind because the only places in LA that served authentic cocktails were Trader Vic's, which was outrageously expensive for me, being in my late 20s, like a $9 drink, was like double what you'd pay anywhere else, or the Tiki Tea. And they were also kind of expensive, they were like maybe $7 or $8, and you could get those good drinks, but
and you could get cocktails for $3 back then. So
right, yeah. Yeah, you go to Kelbo's and a cocktail would be $4 or $5, and you go to a regular bar, it'd be $3.
And it's fun to see like how that connection, right? You started to meet these people and you start to go, wow, you know a lot about cocktails, you know a lot about history, and you're making tiki mugs or tiki carvings, and Otto's like building this Tiki News, which is building a community of people together. I mean, I think you actually just made Tiki News because you wanted to maybe get more tiki mugs. But
okay. Full disclosure, it was a selfish concept. I wanted to trade tiki mugs with other people. So I thought if I could get that Tiki News out to, St. Louis, then somebody there who collected Mainlander mugs would trade one of those to me for like a Harvey's Lake Tahoe mug, or, a Kelbo's mug or something, or a Trader Vic mug, because they didn't have Trader Vic's up there, like regionally, like you would see Harvey's Lake Tahoe, for example, was ubiquitous around the Bay Area and Southern California. But if you went also around Reno or Lake Tahoe area, you would find those in thrift shops or estate sales all the time, because they made thousands and thousands of mugs, and all the tourists, thousands and thousands of tourists went there and got them and brought them back. But regionally, like say if a Kon-Tiki Ports was in some city like, Minneapolis or Detroit or whatever, they would have like a slightly higher concentration of those mugs. So my thought was, get this zine out there to the world, mail it out, get it distributed, get it in people's hands, and then they will meet me, and then I can have a forum for trading mugs. So in the first one, there's like an ad for Mike Lucas from the Phantom Surfers had a few mugs to trade. So I gave him an ad for free, and he had like 3 mugs in this ad, like, hey, I want to trade these mugs with somebody, I mean, that's really like how basic and kind of crude and DIY it was, like really embryonic, a very low level,
So truth be told, we've been hunting down Tiki News for a while, and right now we only have one. We have issue number 13, the artist issue, so we were able to pick that up. But we've been hunting for all the others. What was the circulation like, and what was the reception to? Were you getting emails or postcards back saying like, I'm into tiki stuff too, I'm in Cincinnati, or were you getting that community response that you were looking for in those early editions, or did it take a while for that to catch on?
It caught on pretty quickly, but organically. So just like Tiki Oasis, it grew, like kind of doubled each time. So like the first issue, I only put out 150. and I only made it like 3 pages. People go, oh, it's really thin. It's not even like a full zine. But I made it so that I could mail it with one stamp because the big hindrance was the postage, right? Like I didn't want to pay $1 in postage for a zine that only costs, I think the first issues might have been like $1.95 or something, and then later on it went up to like $3.95. So I didn't want to pay like 50 cents in postage. I wanted to pay 25 cents in postage to mail the thing out. So uh, initially I mailed out the first issue for free. And so like Baby Doe had mentioned, there was this bulletin board, email bulletin board. Like you couldn't post photos and see much, but people could post email type messages to this bulletin board. It's called Exotica Mission. So I posted there like, hey, I have this zine, send me $1 and I'll send it to you. So that covered the cost of the zine, 50 cents, and the postage, 25 cents, and I mailed them out. So I only put out about 150 the first one. And then like the second one was maybe 250, the third one was maybe 300 or 400, the fourth one was about 300 or 400. Uh, and then at a certain point, I got a distribution from a couple little record labels, like say Get Hip in Pittsburgh, picked it up in their mail order, but they would only sell like 5 copies or something. But then at some point, I got picked up by Tower Records, and the point where I got picked up by Tower Records is this: they had a zine section that they had had for, I don't know, a few years, not a long time, but it was big. They had, I don't know, 50 zines or something. It was a full section.
Magazine, every kind of zine.
Yeah, they had a huge
Very
magazine section,
comprehensive.
and then within that was a huge zine section. And so I said, man, I wish they would pick up my zine. Like, Tiki News is great. And I had emailed some people there trying to get it picked up, but I didn't get a response. So I just put my zine on their shelf. I put like 2 copies on their shelf, and then I forget how it happened. I forget whether the guy called me or emailed me or I walked in there or something, but the zine buyer in San Francisco contacted me and said, hey man, I see what you're doing. Like, this is causing me a problem because people come in and you put your zine there and then they want to buy it, but then the guy at the register can't sell it to them because it doesn't have a barcode. Everything has to have a barcode. So why don't you just give me 30 of your zines and, I'll put barcodes on them and distribute them. I'm like, great, awesome. But with the circulation of like, 300 or 400, like 30 zines, like, whoa, there goes 10% of my zines. So then when I got to Tower Records, then I had increased the circulation by about 100. And then they took that 30 and they all sold. So next time he's like, okay, I'll take 60 or whatever, or 80 or whatever. And then what they did is they were international. They had stores all over the place, like London, and they had a store in Israel and like South Africa. And they just made Tiki News available on their distribution. And then the stores could purchase them. And so little did I know, but Tiki News was all over the world now. And so I got, whoever bought them in London and whoever bought them in Japan would email me or send me a postcard, like you said. I had tons and tons of letters and postcards. And one guy that bought it in Israel then moved to San Diego, and he's in a surf band, and they played at Tiki Oasis. So that's how deep the connections were, through Tiki News.
And I think, people really just loved that there's somebody that's putting together all of this stuff that they liked. So, it was not uncommon that people would send a stack of photos like, hey, you should cover, my tiki bar, the cool tiki bar here in Detroit or in, Japan or wherever, anywhere they were. People would mail like actual photos and sketches and things like that. So, you kind of like quickly got other people to write articles.
Right. I could then assign that. I was like, okay, you're in Atlanta and you have a Trader Fix. Can you just do a little article on it, like a review of it, and send me a bunch of photos?
Yeah.
So it helped to grow the zine. And then I got in with the zine community in San Francisco, kind of unbeknownst, like accidentally. And then I was getting distributed by Last Gasp, who were really big book distributor at the time. They've gotten a lot smaller since books kind of died, but they were very cutting edge, putting out R. Crumb and Robert Williams art books and all kinds of books and zines and magazines and stuff. And they said, well, how do you get this printed? And I go, well, I go over to that copy shop down on Mission, and they have this really high quality copier that, there's only like 5 of them in all of San Francisco. and it takes them all night to run this thing off. And so I get this pile of paper that's collated, and eventually a box of paper, and then I hand staple them at
Sit there with
home and
stapler.
fold them, and turn them into zines. And the
Yeah.
guy's like, no, 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 no. I'm going to connect you with a printer in Canada who's going to do the whole thing for you, and then you'll just receive a box with zines in it. And I was like, whoa, no way. Are you kidding? So then at one point let's see, issue number, when did it go color? Like with the color cover, issue number 15.
Yeah.
So we only put out 17 issues. I started off being a bi-monthly, which ironically means twice a month and also means every other month. That word means the same, two different meanings. It was bi-monthly, like every other month. So I did that for the first year. And then the next year I only put out like 5 issues. And then the next year I only put out 4 issues. And then slowly it turned into like 3 issues. And then by the time we got to like 15, it was only 2 issues a year. By the time we got to 17, it was only 1 issue a year. So just to put that into perspective, it existed for from 2000. Oh wait, no,
95 to
yeah, 1995 to 2001. I think was the last issue.
Yeah. And so he started January of 95, the zine, and we met January of 1996. So, that first year that Otto was making the zine and trying to come up with fun ways to promote the zine as well, he started really doing a lot more beyond just his backyard party. That's when he started curating some art shows and having other ways to like connect with people.
Yeah, for every other issue, I had an event. So I had an art show. So for the first 2 issues, no, the first 2 and 3, I had an art show with Shag because he was the cover artist for issue number 2, and another guy, Charles Schneider, I think, was
that the Cacao Lounge?
Yeah.
Or in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah. So I had a couple of events, I think maybe 3 or 4 events at Cacao, and then one at this place called Beyond Baroque in Venice near my house, which is much bigger and was like, it's legendary for being the place where John Doe and Exene met each other in a poetry workshop. But it existed long before that. It was like part of the beatnik scene in Venice and stuff. And so I had an event there that was the same thing, art show. I had a couple of vendors, a couple of bands. So I had been throwing these parties all along. And there was, at the same time, there was a magazine called Lounge Magazine that was covering the lounge scene. And so like sometimes I would DJ for their party or, so I was part of the lounge scene and a little bit the swing scene, but not so much, I'd just go see bands once in a while. I didn't dance. And so when I moved up to San Francisco, it was an easy segue. Like people knew me, like they're like, "Oh God, the Tiki guy is coming to town," and immediately, like I threw a big art show right away, like at the Stardust Lounge, this lounge place with 3 artists. I had them mail me their artwork. So Don Frazier from Seattle, Bosco from San Diego, and Shag. And so I had these, and like nothing sold.
And
like
then you DJ'd and the whole thing.
Yeah,
and
DJ'd.
Then we started doing monthly shows in San Francisco as well. And again, all of this is sort of happening somewhat quickly. I mean, meeting him was somewhat quickly, right? So, Otto had done a lot of great stuff, and including Exoticon. And when I met him, I was living in San Francisco, so that's how I ended up in San Francisco. I got him to come up and
I met her in January, and then by September or October, I had moved to San Francisco.
Yeah.
It was all over.
That was that. And it's funny because I think like it was easier to do things like shows and art shows and things like that back then. I think people were very receptive to it. When I first started dating Otto, he was living in Venice Beach, and he had an event he was doing at Madame Wu's, which was a old school restaurant from the 50s, I guess, 60s.
Late 50s. It was a Chinese bar, but Jeff Barry had dinner in there one time for a business meeting, and he saw, oh my God, they have tropical drinks on the menu. They're probably going to be really bad, but I'm going to order one anyway. So he picked out a drink that was different, not a Mai Tai or a zombie. And it came, and it was delicious. And he said, excuse me, I got to go talk to the bartender. And he's like, hey man, how'd you make this drink? The guy's like, what are you talking about? I used to work at Don the Beachcombers, just making the old drinks. He's like, ah, good. Okay. So Jeff told all of his friends. So I'd be at Madame Wu's like at least once a week after that for like all of 95 and 96. I went to Madame Wu's like, 30 times.
And so, they were very receptive, like, oh, you want to have a party here? Sure.
Yeah, yeah. So they knew me. Yeah.
They're not going to charge like a bunch of money.
And they were
or
empty too. Like for dinner, they were a big place with like 3 or 4 rooms, a bar plus like 2 or 3 dining rooms. And at dinner time, even on a Friday night, there'd be like 10 tables, like they were about to close, they were going down. So anyways, yeah, when I wanted to have a party, they're like, yeah, sure, bring it on.
It was pretty like easy to sort of make.
Yeah, I didn't have to make a deposit or, hire security or anything like that.
When I tell people about the Tiki Revival, and that's what we've been focusing on and studying so much, a lot of people I've talked to before, they're like, yeah, Tiki Revival, really got into the full swing around 2000 Book of Tiki. I tell everyone I believe it's 1995 because it's like every single month throughout 1995, you did something that was like now an iconic staple of the Tiki Revival, whether that's Tiki News, in January, and you practically ended off the year with Exoticon in November of 1995. Could you talk about everything that led up to Exoticon, what it was, and then kind of what it was like to plan, the headaches, difficulties, and then what the event was like?
Yeah, I would love to tell that story. So there's a record store in LA called Record Surplus, and it used to be this huge, like Kmart sized building full of records, and they were turning over thousands of records a week. Like they were selling thousands and thousands of records a week. Like you'd see every time I walked in, you'd see a guy at the counter with a stack of 20 records, and I would walk out with 5 to 10 records most of the time that I went in there. They were just this huge high volume record store. They've since changed ownership, because the owner's older. He might have even passed by now, but they still exist in LA, but they're much smaller and they're in a different location. But 2 guys that worked there were Steve Alper, who now owns Atomic Records in like the Burbank or Toluca Lake area, and Strike Ike, who has a radio show on luxuriamusic.com. So like I knew those 2 guys. They worked there. They would sometimes save records for me in the back and stuff like that. And so they had this idea to throw a lounge and tiki big event that would have vendors and would have DJs and would have bands, of course, and like appearances by people, like autograph signings or whatever. And so, we knew Joey Cheesy and Corla Pandit and Joey Altruda had a band, and they brought me in, and they had already had the concept like, oh, Exoticon, but they didn't have a logo or anything like that. And I said, oh, well, I met this guy, Shag. He's the perfect guy to do this. He'll make you a logo and do the artwork. So he did the artwork for the program. I did the layout for the program. And I booked like half the bands on there because I had already had connections with bands like just from my backyard party and just like, just liking bands and seeing a lot of bands. So like I got the Phantom Surfers to come down from San Francisco, and I got Combustible Edison because they released a single in like 1993, and then their first album had come out in 95. So I guess their first album had already come out, and they were a big deal. Like when their first album came out, they were the only lounge band. So they were the biggest lounge band in the country. And everybody knew about them. Everybody in the lounge scene knew who Combustible Edison was. Everybody in the tiki scene, there wasn't a tiki scene at all. But everybody who was into tiki stuff knew about Combustible Edison because they had a song called the Tiki Wonder Hour, and they had a song Breakfast at Denny's that's kind of like a Martin Denny style song. So everybody knew about them. They're like, wow, this is amazing. We've been collecting these old records, and these guys are doing new music in the style of those old records. So I didn't know about this until like 25 years later, but I had written them a letter after their first single came out because Sub Pop, which was a big record label in the 90s, it was big because they had Nirvana and they had Soundgarden and Mudhoney, these big bands that were on their label. They put out this single by Combustible Edison. So I wrote to Sub Pop and said, hey, really love this band, can't wait for their album. Let me know when the album's going to come out. I heard there was an album, but you guys don't have it on your new releases list, blah, blah, blah. And then they sent it to Combustible Edison somehow, who were on the East Coast. And unbeknownst to me, until 25 years later, that was the first piece of fan mail that Combustible Edison ever received. I'm sitting there talking to the millionaire one night at a bar, and he's like, "Yeah, that was cool when you sent us that letter." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." He goes, "That was the first piece of fan mail Combustible Edison ever received." So like that's how small the scene was, right? Like I just sent a letter and it was the first one ever, and they said, "Yeah, we didn't get a lot of fan mail, but that was the first one." So anyways, they then knew who I was, and then, I'm going to jump ahead. Can I jump ahead?
Sure.
Then later on, when they came to San Francisco and I lived in San Francisco, they asked me to open for them as a DJ because they never had opening bands because they didn't want they didn't want to not like the band. They didn't want like some surf band or some rockabilly band to open for them and kind of ruin the mood for their fans. So rather than try to vet bands and like try to get some kind of jazz band in every town, they just told the promoters, "We don't want an opening band. We have a little movie that will play, or we just have a soundtrack. We'll give you, a cassette that will play." So in San Francisco, they had me DJ for them. So the first 2 years, like 96 and 97, when they came to town, they played at Bimbo's, which was a big deal. That's where all the swing bands played. And it's still a big deal to this day. A lot of mid-level bands play their first shows in San Francisco there. It was Combustible Edison's favorite venue in all of America. And up on the marquee, it says, Combustible Edison, DJ Otto.
Good
So
time.
awesome.
You made it.
Yeah,
You
I was
made
the
it.
opening act for Combustible Edison for those 2 years because I wrote that letter to them, and they knew
Yeah.
me from that.
As somebody who didn't get to go to Exoticon, I will
Wait,
say,
I'm not
you're
done with
done.
Combustible Edison.
Okay.
And furthermore, after I had gotten them a gig at the Kahiki. So through the internet, there was a guy in the Ohio area who said, "Hey, the Kahiki is I'm in Cleveland, I think he was," and he said, "The Kahiki's right there, but it's about an hour or 2 hour bus ride. I want to get an event there. I want to do something." I said, "I'll get Combustible Edison." He said, "Oh my God, if you could do that, then I could get a bus of 50 people or something." And so I helped this guy set up that gig, and so Combustible Edison knew me as the guy who helped the other guy put together this show. So I was in good graces with them. So when it came time for Exoticon in the end of 95, I knew them. All I had to do was just call them up and say, "Hey, can you play this gig?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure. How much you got?" And I don't know what we paid them. It wasn't that much money, but we had a financial
They're
back.
willing to do it.
And they said, "Yeah, we'll do it." And the thing just exploded. Like it was crazy. We had it at the Park Plaza Hotel, which is also the opening scene of Wild at Heart, where Nicolas Cage bashes somebody's head on the marble staircase. That was how you entered. You walk up that big marble staircase into this ballroom of this old hotel in downtown LA.
Yeah.
And the show was like, it was nuts. It was crazy. It held like 1,500 people. We only sold 1,500 tickets, but 2,000 people showed up. Like they just kept coming and wanting to come in, and they were hanging out in the lobby and on the stairs and stuff. And we drank the bar dry. By the time like the first band opened up, like the house bar was drank dry. Like it was crazy. It was mayhem. People were like really upset. Some of them, 90% of the people were really, really happy. And then 10% were like really, really bummed because they couldn't get a drink. But, we had Corla Pandit just like make an appearance because his manager didn't want him to play because he
He
had.
was, a historic figure
Yeah.
in the
But like
stays. So
I met Mark Mothersbaugh and Matt Groening. They were hanging out together near Corla Pandit, and my friend was like, "Hey, I want you to meet somebody." And I'm like, "Oh, hey, Matt Groening from The Simpsons. Good to meet you."
In 95, Matt Groening is the guy. I mean, The Simpsons was huge at that point.
It was huge. Yeah. I mean, it was like a number one show and had been a number one show for a number of years. Me and my roommates would plan to watch The Simpsons when it came on. Like we'd sit down and say, "Hey, shut up. You got your popcorn, you got your dinner, you got your beers, or your Mai Tais or whatever you're going to drink. Like, shut up. The Simpsons is on. Like, we're watching it." Like, it was a TV party watching The Simpsons. That's how important The Simpsons was at that time. And Mark Mothersbaugh, had done the music for Pee Wee's Playhouse. I mean, yeah, these guys were already legends. Not, people look at them now as like historic figures, but they were like big stars that had just broke at that time in LA, you know. And here they were, like, just they paid the $10 or whatever to come in and see the show, you know.
Yeah.
Like nobody put them on the guest list. And we didn't,
You're
and
selling every
the people
ticket.
at the door probably didn't know them, so they're like, yeah, $10, come on in, you know. Yeah, I mean, that's everybody in LA just came to that show. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's, you know, hundreds of stories that I don't even know that could be told or have been told about that event.
Yeah.
Um,
And I was going to say, I think like that's what made it such a unique show, is that you had somebody like Corla Pandit, who was like a historic old figure, like, oh, that's like somebody from the actual heyday. And then you had like
you
the
had
Phantom
one of
Surfers.
Esquivel's wives. I think he had like
Yeah.
four of them. One of Esquivel's
Yeah,
ex-wives
so you had like
showed up,
sort of,
and we had to get her a VIP chair.
and then you have, you know, Phantom Surfers with like a strip, it's like
Oh, yeah,
a burlesque girl, maybe you would
They
call
had
it.
these two dancers that were in
Stripping
gorilla
from-
suits, you know, and then they stripped. Like they took off the heads and everybody's like, yay. And then they took off the tops and they had like bikinis on, and then they took those off and they had like tassels on. And after the show, I was like, oh man, those girls were great. Like, you know, how'd you get them? Like, how do you know them? They're like, oh, we don't know. We just asked for some strippers in LA to come dance with us. Can you imagine? These
Yeah.
women show up and they're like, what's going on
You
here?
have to wear a gorilla outfit. But you know, I think like that kind of idea of like it's a mix of like a little bit of punk rock mixed in with a little bit of, you know, old school vibe. Like right away, the scene was becoming something new.
I want to say we did have Samoan dancers there. Okay,
Yeah.
so like the show kicked off with these real guys that were from Samoa that were performing in LA, and I met them through this other guy, Daniel Puisi. And so they did kick off the show. So it had some authenticity. It wasn't just strippers and gorilla sets.
But it's like that idea of like, oh, we're not just like trying to recreate the past. We're not just trying to recreate an event from like the 1950s or 60s. Like that idea of doing something new kicked off right away in that time period, because that's the thing. It was people that were wearing you know, Hawaiian shirts and dresses and picking up these Martin Denny records in the thrift stores were like punkers. Like they were people that were into like industrial music or new wave or something else. And then it's like, wait, what is this? So it was more always like a modern twist. So by the time, you know, Otto and I met and started doing events together, that's where, you know, like we started to kind of like build our events with just things that we like, which is old school and new school stuff, like a mix of both.
Yeah.
Well, and so when I was researching, so I've researched Exoticon so much, and I've mentioned it on the show many times, because you had 2,000 people show up. You had famous people who were there, like, you know, royalty of, you know, the mid-90s TV and music. And I can find a dozen photos of it, of the event.
I know.
I've been hunting for them and I can't find them. But like,
We do have some that we need to scan.
You know, we had a videographer shoot the whole thing, and then I wasn't in contact with him. I think Strike might have hired him or something. And then we lost contact with him, and I kept urging Strike to do something about it. And he finally contacted the guy, and the guy's like, yeah, I don't know where that footage is. So we never got the footage, even though, you know, that guy got paid for it. And he had like a nice setup, like a big tripod, and he had it like another guy roaming around the stage. Lost the footage. I had a friend who's a photographer who took photos and developed a bunch of 8x10s for us. So I have like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 of those, maybe. And then I lost contact with him. You know, he just disappeared.
Didn't document as much like they do now. You know?
Yeah. And so I would be interested in photos from
Great to see
Exoticon.
that.
Well, I've looked, and it's funny because so we've had Don Fraser on. Don was there at the event vending. But I know Shag was also there. I think the only
Shag was there.
photos that I can find is like it's on a website called like Shag Unauthorized or something like that. It's like I don't know if it's a fan page or something, but it's like someone posted photos of him at the event, the flyer, the ticket that they had, and a few other things, and that's like the only place I can find it. And I think we talked to Sven. I think Sven did a slideshow there too, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, he did.
It's a totally action-packed event.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we had this other room that was like the DJ room and vending room. And so La Luz Gallery, who were really huge at that time and still are, they had a huge booth, but we had Record Surplus had their booth because that guy was the financial backer, Mike from Record Surplus. but that was separate from the ballroom, so DJs could perform and you could talk in there. So Sven had did a slideshow. I forget how that went down. I wasn't there when it was actually happening, but Byron Werner was our star DJ there, and like everybody who's into space age bachelor pad music or incredibly strange music, as it was called at that time, knew who Byron Werner was. But there was 2,000 people there, and 90% of the people didn't know who Byron Werner was. And he's playing all this weird, esoteric stuff like Esquivel and weirder, like Les Baxter and stuff. And like nobody was listening to him, but it looks good on our bill. Byron Werner was there. He's friends with Mark Mothersbaugh and Matt Groening, by the way, and that's why they came. And he also brought Esquivel's wife because he had been talking to Juan at that time and stuff. But just funny things like that. Just Byron Werner played and like nobody listened.
Yeah.
So at what point do you're hosting these events, you're having people not only now in your backyard, but selling out an entire hotel ballroom and all of these things? When did you start feeling like Tiki was becoming its own scene? Was it after Exoticon?
Oh, that's a good question. So, there was kind of like the swing scene happening, and that got a lot of press. I mean, everybody loved writing about the swing scene and taking pictures because everybody's dancing. And then the lounge thing started happening. There was Molotov Cocktail Hour radio show on KXLU. They were huge in developing the lounge music scene and playing incredibly strange music and developing tiki music. They had like a Martin Denny birthday party on on Martin Denny's birthday or on Easter or whatever. They would have to do this full Martin Denny show, like 4 hours of only Martin Denny and Martin Denny related. So they started in like, I guess, 88, and I started listening to them, or maybe a year or two later. And then really like the Lava Lounge, Michelle Marini owned the Lava Lounge in Hollywood that was a tiki bar for all intents and purposes, but it didn't have any tikis. And I asked her about that. I said, "Hey, man, this is a great tiki bar." She goes, "No, it's not a tiki bar." And I'm like, "Why not?" And she goes, "Well, because we don't have any tikis." And I'm like, "Why don't you have any tikis?" And she said, "Because I don't want to put tikis in, because then everybody's going to ask me for all these tropical drinks that we can't make. And then they're going to tell me that my decor isn't authentic tiki bar decor." And she was so far ahead of her time because that's how tiki people are now, right? They're judgy. They're like, "Well, that's not very tiki of you, you know." And like, or that thing's not tiki. That's from Mexico or something, right? So she she knew that in 1994. I think that's when she opened. I don't know. I went there a lot around that time, like 94, 95. And then the Blue Hawaiians were the house band. So I think it was maybe Thursday nights. Initially, it was free. You would go in there and the Blue Hawaiians would be playing. Then it was like $5. Then it was $10. Then it was $20 to get in there at the end because they got so huge. They were selling out and people were happy to just pay that. So, she gave the Blue Hawaiians their start. Like they weren't a band before that. They literally formed to be, they said, "Well, if you give us this once a week gig, we'll start a band and we'll play there." So that was going on, before I put out Tiki News. And then, Combustible Edison put out their first single like in 93, but their album didn't come out until 95. So I had started Tiki News in the meantime. And I had seen that I wanted to separate the Tiki scene from the lounge scene. And uh, what else was, well, then the Ultra Lounge, the Incredibly Strange Music books came out. Vale in San Francisco and Research put out the Incredibly Strange Music book. So that was like 93, and then 94, the second edition. And then later on, Vale put out zines around 95 and 96. And so we got featured in the second zines issue of zines after Tiki News had been around for a couple of years. And then the Ultra Lounge series, the Capitol Records Ultra Lounge series, really blew the doors off of it really separated the swing scene from the lounge scene. So like you had the movie Swingers come out in, I don't know, I think 94 or something. And that was about the lounge scene. And it was about Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. And it was about the Derby. And it was about people dressing up in suits. And I was thinking, well, there's this lounge scene too, where people are dressing up in suits, but we're not those guys. So when Ultra Lounge CDs came out, that was kind of like the big separation. That's when the lounge scene got a lot of press and got noticed. And then new lounge bands popped up and people had lounge nights at their bars, their dive bar or whatever bar. And then lounge bars started popping up that were Vegas style, leather Naugahyde booths or whatever, Three of Clubs in LA, it still exists, it was a lounge bar. But you know, the funny thing is like you couldn't go in there and order anything like technical. Like I remember ordering an old fashioned one night, and the guy's like, I don't have the recipe. Do you have the recipe? You give me a recipe, I'll make it for you. And I was thinking, wait a minute, this is a standard on all these old menus. You know, like shouldn't these guys know that? They could only make martinis and pour a beer. You know, that was back then. I'm sure they make great drinks now, but back in 1994. Getting an old fashioned was a challenge. In fact, actually, when Combustible Edison first played in LA, they played at some bar in Hollywood, and I went up to the bar and I said, I'd like a martini. And the guy goes, wow, I haven't had an order for one of those in a while. And he's like, how do you like it? I'm like, I don't know, the traditional way, with gin. He's like, okay. And then, what else goes in it? Like, like he didn't know how to make a martini.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't know either. I was like, well, it's got like some vermouth and an olive, like I'm not sure, it was really weird. Like, Combustible Edison, here's this eye swinger. They're the cocktail revolution, the cocktail nation, and they're playing in a bar in Hollywood and the guy can't make a martini,
I think what's funny about like when you're in it, you don't totally like there's not like a defining moment where it's like, okay, now tiki is a thing, I think it was many different things that were going on. I definitely think that there was people that were the rockabilly people that were swing dance people. There were people that were garage rock, there's all these different kind of genres going on. And what was always very interesting to me about tiki in that time is that it was all of those people. Like anybody could be part of it. So the lounge scene, like Otto was talking about, was really big, but that was like, oh, okay, like I could just put on my like nice cocktail dress and I'll go to the lounge party, but then I can also, get put on like my corduroy jeans and be like at the garage rock thing. So, it's sort of like there was a lot of crossover. So it wasn't like its own thing. It wasn't like I'm a tiki person. I am just tiki.
No.
And I would say, with all of these things that are rapidly happening, like things such as Exoticon, the Tiki News, what Sven was doing at Jeff Barry with all of his cocktail books and everything, all of this started to kind of create this like bundle or pod of, like a kit of parts, right? Of like, oh, these are all the things that make like a tiki that's like a tiki thing. So I would say that like for me, once that those were more established, when you start to get kind of mid to later 90s and you start to have like the art shows and the more defined things that were like, this is a tiki night, this is a tiki art show, this is a tiki, event.
Right.
This is like, then it became like, oh, this is like an actual thing. And then with the internet, then you start to have more websites. It was no longer just Baby Does Tiki Obsession and Tiki the Dog, it's hundreds of
I want to
websites.
point out, Tiki
So-
News did have a website
Yeah,
in 1995.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe like 6 months after Baby Doe,
Yeah.
or a few months after Baby Doe. We had a website in 1995.
By 95, like I started mine in 94. By 95, end of 95, there was, hundreds, right? So
I don't know if
I mean,
hundreds.
it was happening very, very quickly that people were starting to kind of like define what these different things are.
Oh, I also want to point out, like I mentioned, the Ultra Lounge CD series. So they were huge, and obviously in LA where I live, they were huge. But I had already started putting out Tiki News before those came out. But the first one they put out was called Mondo Exotica.
Yeah.
It had, some Martin Denny tracks along with all these other obscure Exotica tracks. So that kind of set the template, because anybody who wanted to be a Tiki person, all they had to do was look at that CD and go, wait, who's this band, the Out Islanders? I need to get all of their records. And who's this band, this guy, Tak Shindo? I need to get all of his records. So people had some guide posts to guide them into what tiki was.
But that also made it sort of fun for us as we started to design these events together in like 96 and moving forward, was that we get to kind of, we sort of got to do what interested us, right? So we could book a surf band or a garage rock band or someone from old school like Preston Epps for Bongos on by the Bay, because we were defining it. It wasn't like there was a definition of what this was.
That's true. Nobody could tell us like that's not tiki in 1995 or 96, nobody could say that to us.
Yeah, that was not a thing. That was not a thing at all. Like that's not tiki. In fact, like at some point, like late 90s, Target started doing some tiki items, like a tiki pitcher and a tiki cups and
T-shirts,
and t-shirts and like they did like a chess set and a clock that had tiki.
Yeah.
And I remember like people were like, "Oh, tiki's jumped the shark.
Yeah,
That's it."
totally jumped
You
the
know?
shark. Urban Outfitters had tiki for the summer, and then me and my buddy DJ'd their gig, and they paid us well. And then
Yeah.
the next year, like come January, I'm like, "Hey, you guys going to do your tiki summer thing again?" And the person said, "Oh no, that was last year. That trend is over. We don't rehash, old trends. Like we don't do yesterday's trends. Like we're glad we did that, but." We're not going to be doing that
moving
anymore.
on.
And then about 10 years later, they started doing it again. The tiki scene never died. It just got bigger.
But I remember like we were like, well, we're into this. We're always going to be into this. We'll keep collecting tiki stuff and we'll keep, we're going to keep at it because it interested us. And there were so many different ways to be inspired, that it was very easy for us to find new ways to just like delight us, So I think it's like for us, like we saw that we could kind of help to define what it was, and that made it like enjoyable.
Yeah.
So we're only up to like 1996 or so right
I know.
now. We're only 2 years into or 5 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So after you had moved up to San Francisco and you guys are there together, you're putting on these art shows and concerts. You mentioned Bongos by the Bay. What was that kind of like working together and putting that collaborative effort together into these events?
Bongos by the Bay was a big one.
Yeah.
That was a one-off, but we had a once-a-month show at a very tiny punk club called the Chameleon. And so we would, deck that out and get one band or maybe two bands to play, usually just one and a DJ, and then that was it. And the price of the door, I think, was $3, I think, is what we charged. So we were doing those for about a year, once a month, so that was that 96 or was that later?
Sure, it's like maybe 97. We, Otto was started to do a lot more DJing.
Well, a couple of tiki bars opened up. The Bamboo Hut on Broadway opened up, and they're still in existence. And then the Lilo Lounge opened up in Potrero Hill when Potrero Hill wasn't very hip, but now Potrero Hill is like, it's the hippest place. It's like the Soho or Brooklyn of San Francisco, So I DJ'd at both of those and other bars around town that had tiki nights, so I was getting pretty well known around San Francisco around 96, 97, 98 as, that tiki guy and the tiki DJ and stuff. Yeah. So we threw the Bongos by the Bay in 1999, I think.
I think so. And, we were...
That was Ape's first gig.
Ape the band.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like there was sort of like a lot happening because obviously Tiki News was something that we, once Otto moved up, I started to help a little bit with more like promotions for that. And like, I was like the person that would send it to like the press to see if we could get a write-up in the newspaper,
and we did. And we did. We got lots of write-ups.
So we started doing some of those things together. And I think like, we just realized we worked really well together, It's like, I remember like one of the first dates that I had with Otto, I went down to Los Angeles and he said, "Hey, can you volunteer and help me at, I'm going to host this mug party, these tiki mug
Madame
parties
Liz.
at Madame Liz. And I need somebody to work
Madame
the door."
Liz.
So I asked my friend that lived down there, I said, "Hey, Linda, will you join me?" And then all of a sudden Otto like throws all this stuff at us. Like, okay, here's like the clipboard with the names, here's this and that. And you got to collect this email list, like 20 things. And she's like, "Who's this guy you're dating that's making you do all this work?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this is great."
It didn't even dawn on me. Like just doing work that's just what you did. Like hang up the lights, put the sign on the door, invite people, have them sign the mailing list, like you just do all this stuff. Like for my backyard parties, like, set up the amp, run the extension cord, fill up the punch bowl with more rum and fruit juice, like you just do everything, right? Like,
and that's, so like when
she showed up and I'm like, here's the 10 things you have to do in the next hour.
And so we kind of quickly realized like we work really well together, so I was making the pineapple upside down cake for the Chameleon rock and roll
Yeah,
parties,
once a month parties.
and
She made more money selling the upside down cake than I made off the show promoting it and selling tickets at the door.
everybody wanted dollar slices of pineapple upside down cake.
She'd walk away with $10 and I'd walk away with like $5,
And so it's kind of in a way like somewhat easy for us to start thinking about how we could get broader, with like these events. So like, Otto would get calls like, hey, can you help with the Kahiki event? Or I have an event, where I need somebody to come and be a guest speaker to talk about like Exotica music. And he'd be like, okay. And he just said yes to everything. And we just kind of said, sure, we'll do that. Like you had your DJ gigs. And eventually I got a dance group that I started in 99, the Doublettes, which was a 60s go-go dance group. So then it was like we were doing a lot of events where like the Doublettes would perform and Otto would DJ, and then we'd sell the Tiki News. So we kind of had like a little baby San Francisco empire. And what was kind of cool is that more opportunities started coming our way. So when our friends from the UK at the time came out here to do an event, Las Vegas Grind in Las Vegas, they said, hey, can you come and DJ and host a tiki party? And, can the Devilettes dance? And can we do all of this stuff? And we were like, sure, because we already kind of knew how to do all of that stuff. So we, got to come in and do that big event in Vegas, like pretty easily for us. So we did that in 99 and 2000. And so that's why like we kind of always just said yes, and just sort of figured out how to make it work.
Had you always been interested in dance, or like why did you come up with the dance troupe together?
Oh yeah. So I mean that was kind of like again an organic thing. I was working at a restaurant where once a year they would have a talent show. And the place was called Radio Valencia. And there was a group of us that said, well, that person's in a band and that person's a poet. Like, we don't have a talent. Like, let's come up with something. And so we decided that we would just come up with a dance together, like a little group dance. And me being like the leader that I am, I was just like, okay, it's going to be 60s style and it's going to be, a Christmas theme and we're going to do this whole thing. And so I think there was like 12 or 15 of us. And we called ourselves the Ho Ho Ho's because we didn't even have a name. And then one of the girls that was at the event, she was in a band called Virginia Dare. And she said, hey, next month, my band is playing and we need an opening act. Will you come and dance? And we said, sure, okay. And so a group of us went. And so she called us the Virginia Daredevil Dancers. And then that ended
Daredevil.
Daredevil.
Get it? It was separate words, but it was Daredevil. It was a combination
Dare.
of the band name, which was Virginia Dare, and then Devil Dancers.
Yeah,
Virginia Daredevil Dancers.
So then that ended up being a sold out show. Like it was like their record release or something. And then another person there, Beth Lissick, said, hey, I got a show that's happening next week. Will you come and dance at our show? And we said, oh, okay. She goes, well, what's your name? And I said, the Devilettes. I was like, I don't know. Like we were at a call, she sort of named us. And then that show got this huge write-up.
Yeah, it was
like
the pick of the week
at
at the Guardian.
With like a line out the door. And then we got a write-up. They were like, we don't know who these Devilettes are. They're the next big thing on the scene. And, we're just a bunch of like punk rock garage rock girls that like tiki and lounge and, weird Elvis old movies. And, we were like, okay, I guess we're like a thing. So then we kind of like started to like research, really like honed it in on like the 60s go-go thing. And we knew we wanted to do something that was more PG-13, go-go boots and fringe dresses. And so there was a lot of us. There was about 18 of us for the first couple of years. So it was a big like undertaking. But what was fun is that we sort of then had a package, right? Like we had a little bit like we got the dancers, we got the DJ, we've got the decor. Like I know how to make pineapple upside down cake. We're good to go, So,
I booked them for Bongos by the Bay to open for Preston Epps.
Yeah.
In front of 2,000 people.
Yeah. So we just enjoyed doing this. And because Otto had always done he did Tiki News, but he before that had done mail order and some other zine type experience. Like we sort of knew how to do things from the ground up and how to be, creative and like how we can like promote things and put things together. And so that kind of like was a big part of like why we had success working together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everything that you guys were doing in the night, it's so impressive because, like you said, it's so fast. Like, it's one thing to go like, yeah, Tiki News and Exoticon, yeah, that came out in the '90s. You don't realize it's only like it's less than a year apart from each other, and you don't realize that you move up to San Francisco. I mean, you guys, you meet and just start hitting the ground running. It's a very very short time period. And so another thing is about the late '90s, early 2000s on possibly the more negative side of things is that these classic places you guys were going to were still at risk of the wrecking ball. Places like the Kahiki, places like Bahukas, places that were still at risk. Could you at least talk to us a little bit about the tropics down in Palm Springs, so a little bit closer to home turf there in California? I know you were both very involved in the preservation efforts, trying to tell the new ownership, don't change a thing. And can you talk about what maybe event you guys started holding to try to convince them of that?
Yeah, so I knew about the tropics because my mom lived out in Palm Desert, so I had always known about it.
And we stayed there one time.
Yeah, well, Sven had done a lot of research about it because it was a chain and it was part of his going to be a chapter in his book. Ended up being less than a chapter, so I knew about the tropics very well in the late '90s, starting well, I had seen it, but I never went to it in the '90s. And then after I started Tiki News, I went to it and kind of researched it a little myself. So from '95 on, and then we went and stayed there. It was in bad shape. It was like kind of a Skid Row motel. Like half the rooms were closed because they couldn't afford to repair things that broke in them. And then the people that were in the rooms were like drug dealers or semi-homeless or something. Like they would have those people be on one side of the hotel and then real customers would be on the other side of the hotel. But a couple of the rooms were closed. Like I was like, oh yeah, I want that one right next to the pool. They're like, oh, that room is closed. And so it was in bad shape.
I mean, a lot of these places that was very true, right? Like, so we stayed there, of course, because, it's a tiki place and there was actual tikis and everything, but it's sort of similar. Like we would go to bars and restaurants in these places that were from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and they were all sort of, had seen their better days, dingy, not kept in good shape.
Yeah, we went to the tropics in Modesto because we had gone to Minnie's bar in Modesto, and we couldn't even stay at the tropics in Modesto. The clientele that were already booked there were so bad that we went to book a room and we looked around and we're like, oh God, this is actually dangerous. Like I mean, I'm a punk rocker. Like I walked around Hollywood. I mean, I've seen all kinds of stuff all over Hollywood. Gang fights and people getting shot and stuff like that. And I didn't want to stay at this place. I didn't feel safe because the clientele that were already there, were like, whoa.
So we were definitely familiar with it, familiar with the Palm Springs location. And so when Pete Maruzzi contacted Otto and said, okay, we got to do something. This is the wrecking ball is coming. They new owners. They
changed the name. They had already filed, changed the name and changed the sign to the Caliente Tropics, and then they were going to change the whole thing over to Southwestern. Like they got the paint job. I think they already did the paint job actually.
Maybe
they had already done the paint job like this.
They're going Southwestern.
Yeah, this.
Which was not, like it's kind of hip, like maybe early '90s, but it's like that's like not even hip anymore.
Yeah, like if you would have if you could take a time capsule about that time and somebody said Southwestern, you're like, what? That's dated. That's like 5 or 10 years old. Like, why would you do Southwestern? So we were horrified. Like so horrified. And Pete Maruzzi is, the head of the modernism committee. He had bought a house in Palm Springs to get a modernism house. And here is this gem that's in his backyard, and they're gonna destroy it, right? So he told Sven, like, hey, we got to do something. We got to like bring people there. How can we do that? And Sven said, well, Otto has a mailing list and Otto throws these parties. Call up Otto and have him throw a party there, Yeah. So it was a no-brainer, like I had been throwing the backyard parties, like just tell everybody who was in my backyard to go out to Palm Springs.
I think we got maybe 50 people on like a very hot day.
We only had a couple months to promote it. So I sent out emails.
Than one.
Yeah. So it was hard, called people up and sent out emails, and that was
And
that.
we did not set out to make this into a thing, but that was a really fun party, even though it was really freaking hot. And all you could really do was be in your room all day, and then in the evening run to the pool so you could sit in the pool and cool
Yeah.
down. And Sven had a little slideshow, tiki slideshow, and
I was supposed to
together.
DJ by the pool,
Oh yeah, no.
and my record warped while it was playing because like some sun was coming through. Like I just had one little thatch thing, and then the sun had moved by the time I had set it up and the time I was going to play, and it was on the turntable, and it literally warped my record. That's how hot it was.
And I love the story that like after, like we did this great like day, maybe it was like a day or two. And then Otto went to the manager and he's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. We only got 50 people to come." And he was like, "What? What are you talking about? That was like the best day, but the
In
biggest
decades,
decades
at
that
this
we've
time of the
had
year,
at this
the
hotel.
best
Like,
bookings.
please, can we do it again?"
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure at what point they did contact Pete and said, "Okay, we're going to keep the tiki. I think you proved to us like we're going to keep it tiki and we're not going to turn it into."
Well, the manager was Casey
Sure.
Jones, who we're still friends
Yeah.
with and does our vending in San Diego at Tiki Oasis, and in Arizona.
Yeah.
He was the manager. And so he told the owners, wait a minute, look at all these people that came. You can't change the decor now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at this point for this event, you were already, was it under the banner of Tiki Oasis? That was
Excuse me.
It was I think what was the first
Sven
year?
Sven had named it.
Like
and
Oasis, I think, was on the first
well, we didn't.
flyer.
Yeah. No, that was the second year
that was
with
second year.
Derek
So
Yaniger.
maybe it was
No,
like,
the
yeah.
first year Sven made
Mid-century.
the postcard art, and it was the tagline was a modern primitive fete. Festival.
And it was a little
was-
tour, like a little driving tour that we went to see. I think we were all just like staying in our air-conditioned cars. And he, took us like on a little driving tour of all the spots around town that were still tiki, which that's sort of what he was known for at the time. Like Otto was talking about, he did these salons, but he also did these like meetups where you would go to say like San Diego, and a group of people would, check out a little, adventure.
We took I set up a bus out to Palm Springs, and Sven spoke at the Tropics one time, like this group of people on a bus, all drinking all the way to Palm Springs. And then they show up at Palm Springs and they're like, "What is this? Tiki Hotel. Who's this guy? What'd you say? Give me another Mai Tai." It was kind of a disaster.
Sort of,
But Sven talked at the Tropics to a group of like lounge people, That was before your time.
Yeah.
That would have been like, I don't know, late 95.
Yeah. So, we knew about the hotel, and anyhow, so when we found out like, oh, this was like the best weekend ever, then we're like, oh, okay, we'll do it again. And I think then we made it more official, like we had more time to plan for it. We also got like a busload of people to come from San Francisco. So we had like this like interesting mix of people. So I would say that 2002 is when it really became something. And then that's where it just became like, oh, okay, there's this is like something that maybe we'll keep doing, but we had no idea. We had no idea that we would still be doing it 25 years
Derek
later.
Yaniger, who does our art, he started in 2002, and it's kind of like a story like with Shag, where he had sent me his art and said, "Hey, I would love for you to do some art. Here's my resume, and here's some samples." He sent it in the mail, hard copy, and I was like, I don't have any money. I can't pay this guy anything. And as I explained to him, I said, "Well, there is something I need you to do. Like we have this event coming up in Palm Springs. You could do, a flyer for it, like a poster for it, but." He had contacted me, I think, because of Tiki News. Like he wanted to do a cover of Tiki News, I think. But he said, like, I'm available for, art commissions, And I was thinking, oh, God, I'm going to have to pay this guy. Like, how am I going to pay him? The event hasn't happened. I don't have any money. And so that's how he got started. And then he told me, kind of like the combustible medicine story, he told me years later, "Yeah, you were my first client. I sent out these promotional packages to about a dozen people, and you were the first one to respond, and the only one that like actually gave me a job from that." And I was like, "Wow, really?" Because he had been famous for Spider-Man and as an animator, so he actually had a following, but he was trying to launch his freelance career and not work for a studio. And then Tiki Oasis was one of his first clients.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think I have one more question as we close out the mid 80s all the way up to the early 2000s. Is so in 2001, Tiki News ceases its production. Could you talk about the decision that went into that of when it was time to roll that up and start focusing on some other projects?
Yeah, it was a sad day, but I never actually like announced that it was the end. Like I didn't know it was the end. So like it was just a lot of things converge. You know, we had busy lives and we both had full-time jobs by that point. And you know, then we had started the gig in Palm Springs in 2001. Uh, and putting out that issue, you know, 17 was like the one issue that came out that year, and it was like, if you look at it, it's about 3 times thicker than the previous issue. So it was a double issue, but I sold it for the same price. So anybody who was a subscriber, I had to put more mail on the envelope that it came in because it
More
was
postage.
heavier.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, more postage to mail it. So it cost me more money. So I actually like lost a little bit of money on that. I had 900 subscribers at the end, you know, so I had to mail out 900 packages. It was a lot of work. So managing the Tiki News became work also. So not just creating it, but like managing the mailing list, managing the money, managing bounced checks. You know, I couldn't send somebody a zine if their check had bounced, you know, so I had to manage that. I mean, that wasn't a big deal, but you know, those kind
Yeah.
of things happen. And you know, trying to manage the distribution, and like some of my distribution was like on consignment, so I had to try to get the money from them. So I was like doing everything plus a full-time job. Plus it was like, you know, the environment is like Y2K, you know, I don't know if you remember that, but in 2000, the transition between 2000, the end of the year 2000, people thought that the world might explode between 2000, 1999, 2000, or 2000, 2001. You know, the environment was just different. And then uh, we got pregnant and we were going to have a child. And so all these things kind of converging, just I just didn't have the energy to keep going. You know, I had an issue number 18. I have the artwork for the cover, you know, done by
Issue might
yeah,
happen
done by
someday.
Vince Ray or
Yeah.
Jorge Alderete or somebody, you know, but I have the framework of it, but I never put it out. I just never had the energy and the time
Yeah.
and the money, you know, because I would
Yeah.
have to pay for the printing up front and then get the money back from the distributors.
Well,
And
it's funny because I
you know,
really see
I
it
was trying to
like
be financially solvent, you know,
yeah.
after, you know, seeing that I was going to have a child coming up, I wanted to make sure that I didn't go into debt, you know.
Yeah.
Like also sort of organically happened. Like it wasn't like, oh, let's not do this anymore. It was like, oh, maybe put this on pause. We got a lot
Yeah,
of things
yeah.
going on. You know, we've got the gig coming, you've got your DJ gigs, your job. And, you know, I was doing the Devilettes. I started an event called Teaserama. You know, we were just doing a lot of things. And so I think like that pause button, you know, we didn't feel like an urgency, like, oh, we got to put one out definitely next year. It was sort of like, let's get some other stuff sorted, and then maybe we'll do it at a future date. And then, you know, just the world shifted in different ways, and
Yeah, it kind of fizzled out.
we do have the lost issue though. So
We don't have it. It was never printed.
Yeah.
it was everything was gathered. We still have it in the filing cabinet, ready to go.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this half of the episode, sharing
Yeah.
the early days with us, all of your amazing stories. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, we'll pick back up here shortly.
Yeah.
If the listener thinks you were busy in the 90s, I think something tells me that in the 2000s and 2010s to now, I think we have some more busy stories coming.
Continues.
Yeah.
The story continues. All right. Thanks, y'all.
All right, thank you.
Bye.